Alright, today we're talking about Flash Forward, a miniseries about the redemption and progression of Wally West, written by Scott Lobdell and drawn by Brett Booth. Now, I'm not a big fan of Scott Lobdell. I've mostly only read his DC work. I've read a little bit of his stuff from Age of Apocalypse, but I couldn't really pick out his work from any other, as I read Age of Apocalypse in like a big compendium collection. But with his DC work, I really haven't enjoyed anything that I've read. Likewise, I'm not fond of Brett Booth as a whole. I know I've seen some of his work that I've actually liked, but for the most part, I don't care for Brett Booth. So then, you might ask, knowing that I don't like the creators, why did I pick up this book? Well, honestly, I was originally going to skip it, until I found out what the story was. You see, I'm a big fan of The Flash, and I'm especially a fan of Wally West. Now, I grew up with the Justice League cartoon, and I really enjoyed Wally West in that, and when I started reading comics, Wally West was The Flash. So right away, that's the first reason. I enjoy Wally West. Second, I know a lot of people did not like what Tom King did with Wally West in Heroes in Crisis, and this was billed as a book that was going to give Wally West a redemption. So I was interested in it for that reason. Third, I really like the multiverse, and I knew that this was going to deal with the multiverse. And then fourth, I had heard that this deals with Metron's chair and the powers of Dr. Manhattan, both of which are things that I'm interested in. So just overall, there are a lot of things about this book that I felt were poised to be very significant to not only Wally West as a character, but to the DC Universe as a whole. So I figured, even if I'm not that big of a fan of the creators, there's enough here that I'm interested in that it should at least be okay. And, well, yeah, it was okay. Unfortunately, this book really reinforces why I don't really care for Scott Lobdell or Brett Booth, as I feel the book really highlights the weaknesses of these two creators. I feel like Lobdell's characterizations can be a bit flat, and his characters' emotional states can fluctuate wildly in ways that are just very unrealistic. And then on the other hand, I really don't like the way Brett Booth draws faces most of the time. He has a very kinetic and energetic art style, which I think is very fitting for Flash, and so in some regards he is a good fit for this book, but when it gets to the more personal moments, the more character-driven moments, I feel like Brett Booth's art is very lacking. And the story being told here feels pretty aimless throughout, and at the end it makes it clear what the purpose of the story was, but I don't feel like a lot of the story leading up to that point really reinforced or supported the point that was being made. There are a few plot points that I feel made sense for the point that was trying to be made, but they could have been handled much better. I feel like if they were structured quite differently, it could have really driven home the point much more effectively. I don't really want to go into details about what exactly I'm referring to, but let's just broadly say that there are a few characters that show up at certain points throughout the story that feel kind of shoehorned in when I feel like they should have been more naturally integrated into the story and actually been the focus of that moment. And if that was done, I feel like the story would have been much stronger and much more effective at what it was ultimately trying to convey and the point that it was actually trying to get across for having those characters there. And the way that they played with the multiverse, unfortunately, went the direction that I usually dislike the use of the multiverse. See, the way I really enjoy playing with the multiverse is really exploring how things can be different and diving deep into character and concepts and showing the divergence between one version of a character and another. So for instance, Grant Morrison's creation of the President Superman shows up in this. And I feel like utilizing that character and the characters around him, you have a strong potential of really exploring the way a black President Superman would differ from the Superman that we all know. You know, what kind of experiences would he have grown up with? What kind of racial prejudices would he have had to deal with? How would he approach situations differently if he is thinking more as a diplomat? What kind of responsibilities would he have? What kind of responsibilities would he divest himself of? There are a lot of different interesting ideas that you could really explore with this character and how he differs from a normal Superman. And unfortunately, the way that it's presented in this book is, well, it's just another Superman. And there's not really any depth or exploration of any differences, and it's just basically a Superman drawn in a different way. And they happen to call him President Superman. And that's the way most of the multiverse is handled in this story, which is not uncommon for a lot of comics, unfortunately, but is the way that I really don't enjoy it. You get brief instances of these different universes, and you're going to get a hint of how they're different, and, maybe some of them are significantly different, but they're just brief appearances, and so there's not really any depth or any exploration, and they show up, they present a problem, they deal with the problem, and then they move on, and then that's about it. Now, I mentioned earlier that there are a few characters that show up that interact with Wally and present some character development and some forward momentum of the story, but I feel like those characters should have been more deeply intertwined with the worlds that they're in, and showing the significance of the character to Wally, and yet showing where they diverge since they are from another reality. So the central idea of the story, I think, is really good. I just really don't care for the execution. And unfortunately, the main things that drew me to the story either are not done well or don't really feel like they have a strong point in the story and are just kind of shoehorned in as a means of moving the character to the next stage of whatever DC has planned for them. So for instance, I mentioned Metron's chair. And Metron's chair does play a role in the story, but you could have cut out Metron's chair and pretty much the entire story would have been exactly the same. I feel like the inclusion of Metron's chair was really just so that they could have a comic that explains where it is and its role going forward in the greater DC narrative. So overall, I would say that this book's not very good. It's important for the grand narrative of Wally West, and it does make some progress in his story and his character development, but I would say that that's really the only thing that it has going for it. Everything else in this book, I would say, is either unnecessary or poorly done. I would have loved to see the same story handled by a different writer. Now, if Geoff Johns had written the same exact story, I feel like it could have been extremely interesting and could have potentially been one of my favorite Flash stories ever. But the simple fact that it's poorly executed strips a lot of that interesting stuff away. So Flash Forward is unfortunately a story with a ton of potential and a ton of good ideas, and they're all wasted. And hopefully Flash's story in Dark Knight's Death Metal plays out much better than this, and wherever Wally goes from here on out is much better and handled by a writer who can actually do the character justice. Yeah, those are my unfortunate thoughts on Flash Forward by Scott Lobdell and Brett Booth. Be sure to help me out by hitting like, leave a comment, give me your thoughts on Scott Lobdell, Brett Booth, Flash Forward, or any of it, and hit subscribe if you want more honest comic book reviews in the future. And until next time, this is Uncle Joel saying, stay tangible.